Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Humans are not designed to live in vacuum. We can't handle extremes in temperatures, the lack of oxygen, and the massive amounts of radiation. And of course, space whale semen, which apparently makes up 25% of the mass of the universe. The more you know. This is why space travel is pretty terrifying if you think about it, especially if your ship has no shields, minimal life support on board, and a very thin layer of transparent steel protecting you from certain death. But that's a TIE fighter. What actual ships are well designed for space travel? What ships do we recommend you purchasing if, say, you're a young family with young children and you want to keep them safe while traveling the very dangerous hyperspace lanes? Well, today we're going to be looking at the safest and best protected ships in each class. Airspeeders are probably the most common type of vehicles in the entire Star Wars galaxy. They usually don't run on thrusters, but instead rely on anti-gravity devices known as repulsor lifts. Because these flying cars don't rely on aerodynamics and lift for flight, and repulsor lifts are generally very reliable and work like magic, there doesn't seem to be many safety standards in airspeeder design. An alarming amount of these vehicles actually seem to have open tops, which can be a bad idea when you're flying thousands of feet off the ground. So straight away, I would try to eliminate any open top or convertible airspeeders, and unfortunately that also means speeder bikes. As much as I love motorcycles, I know that making motorcycles fly is probably going to increase the danger level for the operator. So for safety, I would look at some type of high-performance airspeeder like the T6 Skyhopper or the T47, and even the very malaligned Storm 4 Cloud Car isn't a bad choice. What separates these three speeders from, say, the one Anakin stole is that they all have backup engines. I really like the T-47 snowspeeders because they were essentially starfighters stripped down to function as in-atmosphere fighters. They had all the defensive and offensive measures you might expect, minus some shielding, of course. And they also had some features like harness-style seatbelts and a rear gunner with a harpoon gun, in case any aquatic foes are chasing you. Of course, the Rebellion lost most of their T-47s during the Battle of Hoth, but that's what happens when you fly straight into the guns of an AT-AT. Even the best designs cannot defeat poor operators. Snub fighter is actually a slang term used to describe fighter models which usually carried a crew of 1 or 2 people. Each faction and corporation involved in manufacturing starships had their own design philosophies and styles when it came to making ships. Incom Corporation, for instance, focused on packing as many features as possible into every one of their fighters so that they could operate independently from a carrier or fleet. Ships like the ARC-170 were completely overdesigned. They featured a 3-man crew, powerful shields, a hyperdrive, and oversized blaster cannons. It was definitely well protected, but arguably too large and slow, and fell victim very easily to more nimble Confederate droid fighters. The X-Wing series that followed sacrificed some weight and stripped some features, including a co-pilot and gunner position. It was better balanced and considered a pretty terrific all-around starfighter, but we are going to choose the X-Wing this time around. On the opposite side of the Galactic Civil War, you had Senior Fleet Systems. They were known for mass-producing single-seater short-range fighters, which were basically used on Star Destroyers to screen incoming fighters. These were very cheap, short-ranged, and nimble starfighters that generally lacked shields, heavy weapons, or armor plating. Even more advanced versions of their ship, like the TIE Interceptor, were underprotected compared to their Rebel Alliance counterparts. It took an outsider, not an outsider to Senior Fleet Systems, but to the Galactic Empire to turn things around. Grand Admiral Thrawn, a Chiss military leader assigned to the Imperial Navy, quickly realized the Empire's need for a true space superiority craft and designed the TIE Defender Mark I and TIE Defender Elite. The TIE Defenders saw very limited action, but when they did, they made easy work of their Rebel counterparts. Not only were the hulls of the TIE Defenders made of heavily reinforced titanium, they were also protected by Noble Dex deflector shield generators rated higher than any other starfighter in its class. On top of that, the TIE Defender had a large assortment of offensive armaments, but still maintained that class-leading maneuverability we saw from the normal TIE fighters. Unfortunately, neither the standard TIE Defender or the Elite version would see much combat because it was competing directly with the Death Star program for funds, and Grand Admiral Thrawn would disappear in a space whale accident, leaving the project leaderless. Transports are an in-between class of ships. They're similar to freighters because they carry sentient cargo, but at the same time they need to be well protected and well armed like a starfighter to make sure the cargo makes it to the location in one piece. There are more luxurious shuttles like the Lambda-class shuttle, which was used by Imperial officials, or more infantry-focused ones like the LAAT, which could lift both tanks and a squad of clone troopers into battle. But neither of those ships could really handle the transport's biggest enemy, which would be a wing of starfighters or anti-aircraft fire. Now, I was originally going to choose the U-wing for my best transport, but then I found something kind of similar to the U-wing, but almost better in every way. Meet the Comrec-class fighter built by Mondol Motors. Like everything the Mandalorians make, price is oftentimes not an issue. Their main focus is making the deadliest vehicle or weapon possible. While the Comrade class is called a fighter, it actually is quite a large vessel at around 52 meters. An X-Wing, for comparison, is just around 12.5 meters. This Mandalorian fighter also has room for 24 passengers. The U-Wing only carries around 8 for some reason. Despite its larger size, the Comrade could also handle dogfights pretty well and could even go up against much smaller fighters. One unique feature on this craft is that the entire wing rotates around the fuselage, which can make it quite confusing for enemy starfighters trying to lock onto it. One of the most dangerous parts of a transport's job is inserting troops under heavy fire. In the event that a transport is damaged in atmosphere and the engines are taken out, it might lose the ability to fly. Since most Star Wars ships are not designed to be aerodynamic in any way, dropships like the LAAT become a flying crate once their repulsors and engines are turned off. But something like the Comrade class with its large flying wing design could still be maneuverable in case of engine failure, adding another feature which makes it the safest transport in Star Wars. Freighters are the backbone of the Outer Rim economy, especially on planets that aren't populated enough to warrant visits from large interstellar cargo ships. Freighters are kind of like the working van of our own world. They usually come bare bones from the factory, and then each, let's call them small business operators, will modify their empty vans with an assortment of weapons attachments, hyperdrive upgrades, additional thrusters, secret smuggling compartments, heavy armor plating, and of course some additional shielding. It's really up to the user to decide what they want their ship to look like. Now, popular opinion will most likely point towards the YT-1300 as the safest or best ship in class, but I actually believe the Millennium Falcon is an aberration. It's kind of like when you see someone dump $50,000 in aftermarket parts into a leased Honda Civic. It usually doesn't turn out great. I like the idea of modifying my ship with a bunch of aftermarket parts, but that's also what makes this class of ships so unreliable, and the Millennium Falcon was the poster child of unreliable third-party components. And it doesn't even have an escape pod anymore, so minus a point for safety. Instead of choosing the obvious ship in this case, I want to look at another engineering marvel made by Corellian Engineering Corporation, the VCX-100. At only 43.9 meters, it was on the smaller side when it came to this class of ships. If you're going to fly around in a civilian ship that is not designed for survival, choosing a ship that's much smaller and more nimble is a good idea. The VCX-100 also had 2 main engines and 2 secondary engines for redundancy. This is also the first ship we're going to be talking about that has a backup hyperdrive, which is incredibly important in space travel. Being stranded in deep space without a hyperdrive is basically a death sentence. The VCX-100 also had several laser cannons on board, including several point defense turrets, along with 2 torpedo launchers for larger ships. It also had the all-important escape pod intact in case things go south, and that was also hyperdrive equipped as well. The aggressive-looking Serena-class Corvette was designed for one thing only: a frontal assault. It had a very bold design, which included a massive hammerhead-shaped bridge, which was heavily armored and protected the more vulnerable generators and thrusters at the rear of the ship. The Hammerhead Corvette also had most of its weapons emplacements positioned in the forward area as well. Without laser turrets that could fire off bore, the pilot of this Corvette was almost forced to fly it like a starfighter. The Hammerhead Corvette's design came from the old Republic era when massive space battles were quite common. The Republic used hammerhead-shaped designs for thousands of years and would carry out assaults with hundreds of these ships, all oriented in a frontal attack. It was a very intimidating tactic. During the Battle of Scarif, the Rebel Alliance picket ship Lightmaker was heavily damaged and kept in reserve for most of the battle until it was called upon to ram a disabled Star Destroyer into another Star Destroyer. This caused a massive collision, and both ships were just miles above the planet and crashed onto its surface. Generally speaking, Confederacy of Independent Systems ships are not designed for humans. In this case, that might be a good thing. The Munificent-class star frigate was quite large at 825 meters in length, but like most SEPI warships, it required a very small and minimal crew because most of the ship was automated. Instead of devoting space for living beings like living quarters, cargo space for supplies and other facilities, the entire ship is filled with weapons and weapons emplacements. Which is why for a frigate, the Munificent class was extremely heavily armed. It had 2 heavy turbolaser cannons, 2 long-range heavy ion cannons, 26 twin light turbolaser cannons, 20 light turbolaser cannons, a dozen flat cannons, and 40 point defense light laser cannons, and much, much more. This is why the Munificent class oftentimes exchanged broadsides with larger class ships like the Republic Venator class Star Destroyer. Because there were very few areas where sentient beings could actually walk around in the ship, most of the ship was left unarmored and only the most critical areas were heavily armored with plating. This would drastically decrease the weight of the entire vessel. When it comes to the cruiser class, you have to look no further than the Mon Calamari, an underwater species known for their deep space exploration ships. The Mon Calamari lived in massive underwater cities. Many of their buildings and structures were pressurized for comfort. This means as a species they had a lot of experience designing structures that were pressurized against crazy amounts of pressures that could be found deep in the ocean. And they took those same high standards when it comes to building underwater structures and applied them to shipbuilding. As a matter of fact, it's rumored that during the Galactic Civil War, some of the first ships to escape Imperial occupation were actually civic buildings that were modified to fly in space. Because these Mon Calamari ships were designed to function underwater, their hulls were much stronger than your conventional ships. And that's because there's no pressure in space, and usually most of the larger vessels in the galaxy are built in orbital shipyards, which means that many designs don't technically need to be able to withstand the stresses of atmospheric flight. This makes these more conventional designs a lot less durable. The MC-80 class cruiser, like all Mon Cala ships, were known for its amazing toughness, although it was usually outgunned by its Imperial counterparts. The legendary armor on Mon Cala ships allowed them to go toe-to-toe with Imperial class Star Destroyers. The other thing that made the MC-80 Star Cruiser extremely safe was the fact that it relied on a network of redundant shield generators that covered the entire ship. This meant that when one generator was overwhelmed, a backup generator would immediately kick on, leaving no gap in the protection. Plus, because there were so many different generators, when a generator went down, only a small portion of the hull was exposed to enemy fire. Most larger ships in the Imperial Navy, for instance, had larger shield generators that weren't as quick when it came to recharging. This meant that once they were taken down, they were completely vulnerable to attack. So there you have it, guys. Those are 7 ships that I believe lead their class when it comes to safety, which is really important when you're looking for a new vessel to acquire for your fleet. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button, and also stay inside and stay safe. Well, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.